Always keep the doors and windows locked at night, especially when you're staying in a cabin in the woods. This is Darkness Prevails, the best place to share your creepy stories with the world, because this world is a strange one. Cabins are already eerie enough, little getaway shacks in the middle of the woods, far away from civilization. But what happens if someone breaks in? And what happens if that someone isn't entirely human? Well, the talented author Fresh Lad 4 tells us their story from the Reddit nosleep forum about the time when something came into their cabin. You can use the links in the description to read the original post or to check out more from Fresh Lad 4. But for the moment, prepare for our weekend getaway to the cabin in the woods. So, I've noticed a lot of experiences take place in the woods. I had previously thought that there were fewer people experiencing strange happenings in forests, despite the many unexplainable events I myself have experienced. Anyway, I figured I would share one of mine, so here goes. This happened 15 years ago, I believe, because I remember being around 10 at the time. Growing up, I had a best friend named Michael. He was my neighbor. Our families had been neighbors since before we were born, so even if we didn't want to, we would have been made to spend time with one another. Luckily, though, we were quite easy to bond. His family would go to a cabin in the mountains. The mountains, of course, is what we called it, but the nearest mountain range was incredibly small, so it was much more notable as just being a forest. When we were 10, my parents allowed me to accept their invitation for me to join them on their trip that year. Excited as I was at the time, this would quickly change after staying there. When the day comes, we depart from our hometown and embark on the nearly 3-hour trip to the cabin. Michael and I are both elated that we get to spend a whole week together in this cabin, just enjoying the outdoors away from society. It sounded way more enticing to 10-year-old me, I promise. At some point, I had fallen asleep. I assume Michael did too, since his parents called both our names as we were pulling up the snow-covered drive to the cabin. I look out the window, and I see a vast blanket of fresh snow covering everything. It must have snowed as recently as that morning, at least 5 inches deep too, judging from the snow amassed on the cabin's roof. This cabin was entirely surrounded by a forest that somehow still managed to appear incredibly dense, despite none of the trees even bearing leaves. The cabin itself was incredibly small and wooden, and only bearing about 5 windows throughout. As soon as the car is parked, Michael and I burst out of the car and tromp through the snow, chasing one another and throwing snowballs. His parents took our bags and coolers of food inside and started making a home of the place, while we stayed outside nearly until dark, playing in the snow. As nighttime was nearing, Michael and I heard what I can only assume was the cry of an animal. It sounded like a nervous, shrill bleat. We both guessed it must have been a deer. Not long afterwards, Michael's dad would call us in for dinner. After dinner, we sat in the living room area. His mom tried to turn on a lamp, which wouldn't turn on. His dad joked about the place being cozy, but being wired horribly. Then he started a fire in the fireplace, and we just hung out until it was time to wind down for the night and get ready for bed. Michael and I headed to our room, which featured 2 twin beds, a closet whose door refused to latch, a throw rug, as well as one of the 5 windows in the cabin. Michael and I, being young and having slept on the way to the cabin, weren't really ready to sleep. So instead, we spent our time sitting in our beds, trying to scare one another the way kids do. We began nodding off and called it a night. We switch off the lamp and go to sleep. I was woken up in the middle of the night to what sounded like a very small slam or bang. Being jarred right from my sleep, I thought I had imagined the sound, but something woke me up nonetheless. I bolted upright in my bed, and I am sure I saw something creeping out of my peripheral vision. But the room was heavily shadowed, and it was a moonless night, so there was nearly no natural light to bathe the room. There was just me, Michael, and something else in the pitch black. I turn to the lamp, and I switch it on. Nothing. I try again to turn it on, but nothing. Beginning to panic, I search through drawers in the nightstand the lamp sat on, until my hands found a flashlight. I pull it out and light it up, placing my hand over it, shining it through my fingers, not wanting to make too much light so I wouldn't draw attention from whatever was there. I shine the small beam of light around the room slowly, always fearing the next inch of room the light would reach. Shining it on Michael's side of the room, I found he was still asleep. I crawl out of bed as quietly as possible, shining my light at the floor. I remember it like it was yesterday. The sight of melting snow footprints making their way across our room from the window. They stopped halfway through the room when the prints came into contact with the rug on the floor. I cried out in fear and ran to Michael's parents' room, waking them up and telling them that something got inside our room. They believed me and rushed to the room to inspect. However, I would lose their trust when they found the wet footprints gone, like they had dried up instantly, hiding themselves. His dad inspected the window, and the window was locked. No way something could have gotten in. His parents weren't mad. They told me everything was all right, then sent me back to bed. I curled up with the flashlight still in my hand in case I should need it again. Eventually, I would get back to sleep and make it through the rest of the night. The next morning, Michael and I were woken up by his parents encouraging us to stay quiet. All of our bags were packed and in the car. We were rushed outside and into the car as quickly as we could, still in our pajamas. His dad was the last out of the house and into the car. We drove all the way home, and Michael's dad told us that they had forgotten something at home, and that it was too much of a hassle to drive all the way back to the mountains just for a few days. I always thought there was something fishy about that story. Over this past Christmas, Michael and I found some time to hang out and catch up. Our families had gotten together in his living room, and we were just discussing life and reminiscing over some drinks. Then we bring up the cabin story, and his dad's demeanor suddenly becomes serious. That's when he decided to tell us what he actually knew. Well, Michael's dad woke up at the first light of dawn on the morning that we would leave. He got up and headed outside to collect firewood. Going behind the house where the forest was thickest, he spotted a trail of footprints in the snow coming from the woods. leading directly up to the window in Michael's and my room. He didn't really know how to describe the footprints, other than they didn't look entirely human, unless a human walks around on all fours with 3 long toes on each foot. He circled the cabin, looking for exit tracks, and found none. He immediately rushed into the house, woke up his wife, and told her to pack everything while he searched the house. As much as he searched, though, he found nothing. Not willing to take chances with whatever was in the house with us, he instead had us get the hell out of there as quickly as he could. While Michael's mom was loading us into the car, he was checking through the house one last time. And upon checking our room, he found the closet slightly ajar, with just enough light shining in to illuminate a sunken black eye peeking out and watching him.